When Ellie Monroe bought a rundown farmstead for just $5,000, she thought she was escaping city noise and chasing quiet sunsets. But one rusted hatch behind the barn changed everything. Beneath cracked dirt and forgotten weeds was a sealed nuclear bunker still humming, still locked, and far from abandoned. What she uncovered inside would rewrite history and her future. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. And if stories like this pull you in, hit that subscribe button because tomorrow's episode is even more unbelievable than this one. The listing didn't even have photos. Just 5 words: farmstead, fixer, 12 acres. As is. Ellie Monroe stared at it between sips of gas station coffee, legs cramped from the overnight bus ride, and heart still raw from a life she'd quietly walked away from. A mechanic by trade, but lately more of a ghost in a shop apron, Ellie wasn't looking for a project. She was looking for an escape. The farm was 2 hours past where her map app stopped loading and one wrong turn from being forgotten altogether. When she arrived, the wind was loud, and the silence louder. The barn's roof sagged like it had given up mid-sentence. The house was gray with peeling paint, and the porch stairs groaned under her boots. It looked like somewhere time had lost track of. But something about it, maybe the leaning silo, maybe the way the tall grass whispered at her jeans, made her stop walking. No neighbors in sight. No traffic. No memories. That was the real selling point. She handed over the last $5,000 in her savings to a notary who looked like he hadn't blinked since the 80 seconds, and signed the deed with fingers still blistered from her last oil job. No inspection. No guarantees. No going back. The house smelled like mildew and disuse. Ellie opened every window she could, fighting stubborn pains that hadn't moved in years. Mice had made artwork in the kitchen drawers, and the bathroom mirror was more rust than reflection. She set her duffel down and exhaled like she hadn't in weeks. Her new home was equal parts broken and quiet, and that suited her just fine. That night, she slept on the floor in her work jacket, the hum of crickets her lullaby. The air was different out here, thin, but honest. No flickering neon signs, no car horns, just stillness. In the early morning, as fog lifted off the fields like breath, Ellie took her first walk around the property. The barn leaned like it was tired of standing, its doors hanging wide open like arms reaching for help. Rusted tools lay buried under hay and dust. A tractor frame, long since gutted, sat like a metal skeleton in the back corner. But it was behind the barn near a half-dead lilac bush that she first noticed it. A square patch of earth with an iron handle sticking out. At first glance, it looked like a drainage plate, but the more she stared, the more it stared back. The metal was scorched in places. Around the edges, yellow paint had faded beneath years of grime, but what caught her breath was the barely visible radiation symbol scratched into the surface. Her pulse jumped. She crouched, fingers brushing away dirt until she found a latch sealed tight. Her gloves were in the barn, her tools still packed, but Ellie didn't move. She just knelt there in the morning sun, staring at that hatch like it had whispered her name. Ellie stood over the hatch longer than she meant to, her knees pressed into dry soil, mind swirling faster than the wind that swept through the grass. A radiation symbol. On her land. She finally stood, wiping her palms against her jeans. The imprint of the symbol burned into her thoughts. Her boots crunched over gravel as she jogged to the barn, breath short, hands searching through the scattered remains of someone else's forgotten life. Cobwebs draped across old rakes. Rusty pliers hung crooked from nails in the wall. But tucked behind a pile of rotted feed sacks, she found a toolbox dented, scarred, but solid. When she opened it, the smell of old oil and steel hit her like a memory. She smiled faintly, as if the tools had waited just for her. Back at the hatch, she fitted her socket wrench into the first of 4 corroded bolts locking down the perimeter frame. They didn't move at first, protesting like joints that hadn't bent in decades. She gritted her teeth, threw her weight into the turn, and finally cracked the first one gave. The others followed, reluctantly. The sun climbed higher, and sweat beaded at her collarbone. Each bolt felt like digging into a past someone had tried very hard to bury. When she finally pried open the hatch, it exhaled. A soft hiss of long-trapped air, dry and metallic, curled up into the daylight. Ellie stepped back instinctively. The hatch door was thick steel lined with lead, judging by the weight. Inside, a rusted steel ladder descended into dim green light. The scent wasn't rot. It wasn't mold. It was cleaner than the house somehow. Sterile. Controlled. The walls were lined with poured concrete, and about 10 feet down, she saw the glow of fluorescent tubes still flickering, still powered. Her stomach turned, not from fear, but from knowing this wasn't just some storage cellar. This had purpose. She didn't climb down yet. Instead, she stood with her hands on her hips, staring into the bunker's mouth like it had just spoken a secret. What kind of farm had a nuclear-grade shelter hidden behind the barn? And why was it still operational? Back in the house, she opened her duffel and pulled out her flashlight, gloves, and the small multi-tool she never went anywhere without. But even as she packed a second bag, a habit from years of late-night road calls and breakdown rescues, Ellie felt a cold finger trace her spine. Not fear exactly. Anticipation. That hatch hadn't been opened in decades, but something inside was still alive. She clicked on her flashlight and returned to the place. Hatch. Her boots touched the top rung of the ladder, and she paused halfway between earth and memory. The air rising from below was cold, too cold for a summer morning. And in that stillness, in that quiet before the descent, Ellie swore she heard something. A low hum. Rhythmic. Mechanical. She exhaled slowly and climbed down. The steel rungs groaned under Ellie's boots, their chill seeping through the leather soles as she climbed deeper. 10 feet. 15. 20. Her flashlight swept across the concrete walls, smooth, seamless, unbroken by moisture or cracks. Whoever built this hadn't meant for it to be temporary. At the bottom, the shaft opened into a corridor no wider than a hallway, lit by a string of flickering overhead bulbs. Conduits ran along the ceiling, industrial, military grade. And at the far end, a vault-style door stood half ajar. She hesitated, letting the silence wash over her. It didn't feel abandoned. It felt paused, like a breath held between decades. Her footsteps echoed as she moved forward, careful not to touch anything yet. The air smelled faintly of ozone and copper-old electronics, maybe still running somewhere. As she reached the vault door, her fingers traced the massive wheel lock. Dust clung to the metal, but beneath it, the emblem of a hawk surrounded by arrows was barely visible. Not military, not exactly, but something close. The door creaked as she pushed it open. Inside was a small chamber, maybe the size of her old garage office. One wall was lined with metal lockers, another with filing cabinets. A desk sat beneath a switchboard, wires tangled like ivy, gauges long frozen at 0. But then she saw the monitor. CRT, built like a tank, and faintly, just faintly glowing. She leaned in. A green blinking cursor waited in the center of the screen. Ellie didn't touch it yet. She explored first. The lockers were empty, except for one number 6. Inside was a coverall jumpsuit, still folded, and a plastic ID badge. Dr. Ellie Monroe. Systems engineer, Project Thistle. Her breath caught. Monroe. Same last name. She grabbed the badge, studying the photo. The woman was in her 30s, auburn hair tied back, calm eyes. Ellie felt the air thin around her. The resemblance was undeniable. She shoved the badge into her pocket and opened the filing cabinets. Most were locked, but one bottom drawer slid open easily, revealing blueprints. Complex, dense, technical. Reactor cores, power conversion, air scrubbers. One sheet had the word autonomous stamped across it in red. Her hands shook slightly as she traced the circuit paths. She understood just enough to recognize that whatever this was, it wasn't just a shelter. It was self-sustaining. Purpose-built. The cursor blinked again on the screen. She sat down at the desk and typed a single word. Hello. The screen flashed. Welcome back. Dr. Monroe. Last login. August 19, 1970. 2. System status. Standby. Initiate reactor diagnostic. Yi. Divided by N. Ellie stared. The system thought she was Evelyn. She hesitated, then tapped the Y key. Somewhere deep in the walls, a low rumble began. Lights flickered, then stabilized. One by one, the gauges sprang to life. The bunker was waking up, and Ellie had just reactivated it. The lights didn't hum like old bulbs should. They pulsed slow, even, Alive. Ellie sat frozen, fingers still on the keyboard, watching the screen flicker with strings of code and system logs dated more than 50 years ago. The temperature in the bunker shifted subtly, no longer frigid but climate-controlled. Warm air began to move quietly, steadily through vents she hadn't noticed until they stirred to life. The air wasn't stale. It was fresh, filtered, breathing. She stood slowly, heart thudding behind her ribs. The system wasn't just in standby. It had been waiting. Down the corridor, another heavy door let out a soft, mechanical hiss and slid open with the sluggishness of disuse. Beyond it, Ellie stepped into a second chamber, larger, rounder. A command center, maybe. The walls were covered in dials, oscilloscopes, old reel-to-reel recorders, and glowing control panels labeled with acronyms she didn't recognize. It looked like NASA by way of a forgotten government budget. In the center of the room stood a tall cylinder of reinforced glass and steel, quiet, pulsing with internal light. The reactor. It wasn't large. Maybe the size of a water heater, but thicker, cleaner, surrounded by coolant tubes and labeled valves. A blinking panel next to it simply read, Reactor status. Green. Power flow. Nominal. System loop. Closed. Ellie stepped closer, eyes wide, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. This wasn't a fallout shelter generator. This was advanced too. Advanced for the era stamped on the files upstairs. Self-regulating, efficient, and still running. She backed away slowly, the implications unraveling in her head like loose wires. Who built this? Why was it on a farm? And why did the ID she found match her own last name? The air vent above her whispered softly again, like a sigh. This place wasn't just a shelter. It was alive, designed to last, meant to endure, untouched, unnoticed. She returned to the control panel and pulled up the diagnostic log. One entry caught her eye. Daily maintenance. Ellie Monroe system logs. 2,146 entries. Last manual override. The 18th of August 1970. 2. Final note. Awaiting instructions. All protocols holding. Reactor optimal. Monitoring phase continues. Ellie's hand drifted to her pocket, where the ID badge rested like a ghost. The photo stared back at her. Same auburn hair. Same jawline. The woman looked like a mirror caught in time. She sat down hard in the chair. If Ellie Monroe was her grandmother, then everything she knew about her family, everything she didn't know, was about to change. Ellie looked around, breath rising into the room's stillness. The bunker wasn't abandoned. It was preserved, not forgotten, protected. And now, after decades of silence, it had been unlocked. Not by mistake, not by accident, but by blood. Ellie didn't sleep that night. She didn't even leave the bunker. Wrapped in an old thermal blanket she found in a sealed cabinet, she sat at the control desk, surrounded by humming panels and ghost light. The soft buzz of power filled the silence like a lullaby from another time. She flipped through files, blueprints, folders, every page stained with dust, every note signed with a looping script. E. Monroe. Ellie Monroe. She barely remembered the name. Her father had never spoken about his mother, only vague mentions of things better left buried. There were no photos, no keepsakes, no gravesite. Ellie had assumed it was abandonment. Now she wasn't so sure. The blueprints sprawled across the desk like a map of genius. Engineering sketches of micro-reactor cores, autonomous filtration systems, geothermal stabilizers. She recognized some of it. Ellie wasn't a nuclear physicist, but she'd pulled enough apart in junkyards to know good tech when she saw it. And this was light years ahead of its time. She found a folder labeled Project Thistle. Inside, memos, clipped classified stamps, redacted lines blacked out so heavily the pages curled. But one sheet, untouched, bore a simple heading. Initiative Thistle. Civilian Continuity Through Technological Preservation. Below it, a mission summary. In the event of large-scale collapse, this site will preserve core scientific systems, data, and sustainable life. Supporting infrastructure. Staff. 1. Cycle. Autonomous. Power. Micro. Fission. Oversight. Monroe. Ellie. Engineer. Class clearance. One staff member, her grandmother, alone for years in this place, tending to machines designed to outlive nations. Ellie swallowed hard. Tucked beneath the folder was a leather-bound journal. A brass clasp held it shut, no key. She turned it over in her hands, then picked the lock with her. Multi-tool muscle memory from years of busted glove boxes and broken ignitions. The first page read, August 3rd, 1969. If you're reading this, I hope the world above is kinder now. Ellie flipped further. Dozens of entries followed, logs of experiments, personal notes, sketches of tools, even plant clippings taped to the pages. But one detail stopped her cold. A page dated 1971, scrawled in faded ink. Today I sealed the hatch. No more contact. No more radio. The agency has gone silent. I don't know if they'll come back. But I'm staying. Not for duty. For Ellie. Ellie blinked hard. Her name. She read it again, slower. If this place survives, maybe she will too. Maybe one day, she'll understand why I stayed. Her breath hitched. She gripped the edge of the desk. Her grandmother hadn't disappeared. She had chosen to vanish for her. To protect this place. This legacy. Ellie looked up from the journal and around the room. The quiet hum of systems, the steady green of reactor lights, the faint glow of monitors, it all meant something different now. This wasn't just a secret. It was an inheritance. And Ellie Monroe had just become its keeper. The deeper Ellie read, the quieter the world became. She sat cross-legged on the cold concrete floor, her flashlight propped between two metal canisters, casting long shadows against the walls. The journal her grandmother's rested open in her lap, the edges soft from years of turning, the ink faded but steady. Evelyn Monroe had documented everything. Not just the systems, not just the science, but herself, her thoughts, her fears, her choices. And then there were the letters, dozens of them, tucked carefully between pages, sealed in yellowing envelopes, each addressed to a name Ellie didn't recognize until she did. One read simply, "To my son, David, her father." Ellie held it like glass, her fingers trembling. She'd never known her dad to show emotion, not once, not even when her blaying mother left, not when the garage closed, not when the cancer took him. He never spoke about his mother, never kept photos. And now, in her hands, was a letter written decades ago that he may never have received. She peeled it open slowly. "David, if this finds you, it means I didn't make it back. I want you to know I didn't leave because I stopped loving you. I left because the project needed me. Because I believed what we were doing down here mattered. You were too young to understand. I was too afraid to explain. That's on me. I think of you every day. Every time the generator kicks on. Every time the systems hold. You are the reason I'm still trying. The world above may forget me, but I hope one day you'll forgive me. Love always." Mom. Ellie read it 3 times before folding it carefully back into the envelope. Then she opened another. This one was addressed, "To whomever finds this bunker." It was shorter, sharper, more of a warning than a message. "If you're here, be careful. The systems still run, but not everything down here is safe. Some tech was never meant to be restarted. The reactor is stable, leave it that way. Whatever you're searching for, understand. This place is not just a shelter, it's a record. A caution. Don't let history repeat itself. Protect what matters. E. Monroe." Ellie leaned back, exhaling shakily. This bunker wasn't just a Cold War relic. It was a time capsule sealed by a woman who had sacrificed her life for science and for family. A woman whose blood ran through Ellie's own knuckles, grease-stained and calloused, forged in wrenches and welding sparks. She thought of the farm above, how forgotten it had felt. But it wasn't forgotten. It had been waiting. She stood slowly, wiping her eyes with the back of her sleeve. There were more letters, more secrets, more systems to understand. But for now, one truth rang louder than the hum of the reactor. She wasn't here by accident. She was the last page in a story. No, one else had finished. And she intended to keep writing it. Ellie had never feared machines. She'd rebuilt engines blindfolded, crawled under smoking hoods, and patched coolant lines with chewing gum and hope. But standing at the threshold of the reactor room, even she hesitated. It wasn't the size of it was compact, elegant, almost quiet. It was the feeling in her gut, the weight of it. Like she wasn't just walking into a room, but into someone else's unfinished sentence. The door to the reactor room was sealed by a biometric pad, one that flickered with green the moment she stepped in front of it. No code entered. No palm pressed. It knew her. With a soft click, the door unlocked. The room was circular, lined with stainless steel panels and control consoles shaped like a wraparound cockpit. In the center stood the reactor core, a gleaming column of reinforced glass and ceramic plating, bathed in soft green light. Inside, a coil of fuel rods glowed faintly, encased in a liquid Ellie couldn't identify. It was beautiful and terrifying. She approached the console, eyes scanning readouts. Reactor status. Stable core temp. 212.4 degrees Fahrenheit. Primary loop. Closed coolant flow. Optimal remaining power. 89 years. 89 years. Ellie swallowed hard. This wasn't backup power. This was next generation. Self-contained. Nearly perpetual. She pulled out a manual from beneath the console, its cover stamped classified, Department of Energy, and flipped through schematics that confirmed what she already suspected. This reactor had no carbon emissions. No fuel access ports. No visible method of external refueling. It was completely sealed. Not a generator. Not military-grade power. Something new. Something lost. Another file on the console blinked. Video archive. Session 01. She tapped it. The screen flickered, and suddenly her grandmother's face appeared, older now. Hair tied in a loose bun. Eyes sunken from years underground. If you're watching this, it means I've failed to finish what we started. This reactor was meant to power cities, hospitals, life after disaster. We designed it to outlast collapse, to be handed down, not just preserved. But bureaucracy buried it, and I buried myself with it. The reactor is stable, Ellie. It will protect you. But know this, if the secondary systems activate, it means someone else is trying to shut it down. Not everything buried here is peaceful. Some tech was built without my consent. The video cut off, static crackling. Ellie stared at the console. Her throat was dry, but her hands were steady. She looked at the reactor again, humming softly behind thick glass. Alive. Waiting. There were more secrets in this room. More videos. More warnings. But what hit her hardest wasn't what the machine could do. It was the knowledge that someone her own blood had tried to change the future with it, and now that future was in her hands. She reached out, placed her palm on the warm metal casing of the reactor, and closed her eyes. Whatever this was, it was no longer just science. It was legacy. The next morning, the sun rose over the fields like nothing had changed. Crickets chirped, wind swept across golden grass, and the creaky porch of the farmhouse still groaned under Ellie's boots. But everything had changed. She stood on the porch with a mug of reheated coffee, staring at the barn and the sealed hatch behind it as if seeing it for the first time. She'd spent most of the night cataloging systems, mapping out the bunker's layout, watching archived video logs, some hopeful, some haunting. Her grandmother had lived here for years, completely alone, running what could have been the most advanced civilian power system the world never knew about. And now, it was hers. When Ellie flipped the main breaker inside the house, something miraculous happened. The lights came on. Not the weak sputter of a dusty bulb, but strong, clear, steady light fed by bunker power. The refrigerator hummed. The ancient wall heater vibrated, then kicked on with a low whine. Every outlet in the house surged to life. The farm wasn't just livable again. It was powered by clean, perpetual energy running from 30 feet below the barn. No gas lines, no electric bill. Just a single glowing core, still breathing decades after the world above had moved on. By midday, Ellie had cleaned out the living room, rewired the kitchen panel, and even got the well pump working again. She wasn't rebuilding a house, she was resurrecting it. And she did it with purpose now. Every nail driven into old wood, every fuse replaced it. All felt like reconnecting threads her family had tried to forget. That afternoon, a pickup truck rattled down the gravel road and stopped at her gate. She didn't recognize the man who stepped out, late 60s, tall, sun-worn face, military bearing. He leaned on the fence, one boot propped on the bottom rung, a curious half-smile on his face. "Didn't expect to see anyone up here," he said. "This place has been dead longer than I've been alive." Ellie set her wrench down. "Bought it last week," he nodded slowly, squinting toward the barn. "You planning to fix that up too?" "Eventually," she said. But the man didn't move. His gaze lingered on the earth behind the barn, on the rusted hatch barely visible through the weeds. Ellie stiffened. "You know what that is?" she asked. He gave a soft laugh. "Let's just say, I've seen a hatch like that before. Back in the day. Wasn't supposed to talk about it then. Not sure I should now." "Then why are you here?" He reached into his coat, pulled out a key on a worn chain, and tossed it into her hand. "I used to work with Ellie Monroe," he said quietly. "She told me if anyone ever opened that hatch again, they'd need this." Ellie stared at the key. The man tipped his hat. "Be careful. What you wake. Up down there." Then he left. Ellie stood at the gate, long after the old man's truck disappeared down the road, the key still resting in her hand. It was cold, heavier than it looked, and worn smooth on the edges. Military style. No markings. No tag. But the weight of it wasn't in the metal, it was in the man's words. "I used to work with Ellie Monroe. Not knew of. Not heard about. Worked with." Back in the bunker, she stared at the locked steel cabinet in the reactor room, the one she hadn't been able to open. No keypad, no handle. Just a single keyhole, rusted around the edges, as if no one had touched it since the Cold War. She inserted the key. It turned with a soft click. Inside the cabinet were two things: a metal briefcase and a leather, bound binder, with a red ribbon tied around it. Ellie opened the binder first. Handwritten pages, detailed schematics, and dense mission reports spilled out, each stamped Project Thistle, Autonomous Systems, Deep Archive. The name Ellie Monroe appeared in the margins repeatedly, almost always paired with another: Colonel Raymond Nash. Her hands tightened. She hadn't heard the old man's name, but he had known hers. She turned the last page and found something that stopped her breath. A photo. 3 people in a concrete room. Her grandmother, a young boy maybe 10, and standing behind them, unmistakable even after all these years, the man from the gate. Raymond Nash. Her father, barely more than a child, sat on his mother's lap in the image, smiling like he didn't yet understand the weight of the walls around him. Ellie stared at it, heart pounding. Her father had been here. He'd known about this place, about the bunker, about Evelyn, and he'd chosen silence. Chosen to bury the past as deeply as it had been sealed underground. She set the photo aside and opened the metal briefcase. Inside was a set of classified tapes, some reel-to-reel, others converted to old VHS, and a worn envelope with her name scrawled across it in looping, uncertain ink. Ellie. The paper trembled in her hands as she opened it. "If you're reading this, it means the bunker found you. Or maybe you found it. Either way, I'm sorry. I couldn't face it. I couldn't face her. I spent my whole life running from a past I didn't choose. But I think you might be braver than I was. Maybe that's why she built it for you. Whatever's down there, don't let it become just another secret. Do what I couldn't." Dad. Ellie folded the letter slowly, sealing the moment inside her ribs like a breath held too long. She didn't know everything yet, but she knew this: her family had been split by silence. She wasn't going to repeat that mistake. Ellie didn't sleep. Again. Instead, she poured herself into the codes, the schematics, the binder with Evelyn's looping cursive. The briefcase tapes sat on the desk like artifacts from a forgotten civilization, their magnetic reels a language she hadn't learned yet. She'd need equipment to play them. Maybe the old AV gear from the bunker's archive room could be rewired. But one thing stood out among the scrawled notes. One phrase repeated in shorthand, over and over. Subsection Delta. CDR reserved. She tore through the bunker's blueprints, and finally found it marked only as a utility corridor behind the reactor room. A straight wall on the diagram, but something about the measurements didn't add up. 2 feet of empty space where no pipes ran, no vents, no wiring. Dead space, or a lie. Ellie grabbed her flashlight and headed down the corridor. Dust clung to the walls like ash. At the far end, past rows of sealed storage units and a rusted oxygen scrubber, She ran her hand along the concrete wall. Nothing. No seams, no switches. Until she remembered the key. The old one, Raymond's, still in her pocket. She knelt, scanning the base of the wall, and there it was, a single metallic plate, flush with the douse floor, barely visible under the dust. She pried it open with her screwdriver. Beneath it, a small key slot. The lock turned with a soft, reluctant click. The wall didn't slide. It breathed a soft release of pressurized air as a panel recessed into the wall slowly folded back, revealing a narrow passage just wide enough to walk through sideways. Inside, everything was silent, undisturbed, unseen. The corridor opened into a chamber no larger than a shed, lit by recessed ceiling panels that flickered weakly to life as she entered. The air was colder here, dry, like a vault, and in the center of the room sat a desk, a chair, and a projector, already powered on. A tape reel waited inside it. With shaking hands, Ellie pressed the play button. Her grandmother's voice crackled through the speaker, low and brittle like aged vinyl. "This is Ellie Monroe, private log, subsection Delta, final archive. If my granddaughter ever finds this message is for her." Ellie froze. "They repurposed my work, Ellie. The reactor was just the beginning. Project Thistle was meant to preserve, not weaponize. But the deeper we got, the more they asked for. Countermeasures, surveillance tech, preemptive shutdown protocols. I resisted, but they didn't need me anymore. Just the machine," the reel hissed. "I built this room in secret, a vault outside of their maps. These tapes, this data is unaltered. It's the truth. They'll come for it, if they ever find out it's still active." Ellie stepped closer to the screen. "Don't let them bury this again. Don't just protect it. Decide what it's for." The reel stopped. Ellie stared into the static, the hum of the projector soft and steady behind her. She wasn't just holding a discovery. She was holding a choice. Ellie didn't want to believe what she just heard, but the weight of it pressed against her chest like gravity. Her grandmother had built something beautiful, something clean, something meant to save, and someone had tried to twist it, to twist her. She left the hidden chamber and returned to the main control room, the tapes under her arm, and Evelyn's voice still echoing in her ears. She sat down at the central console and pulled up the system architecture again. There, buried in a menu she hadn't opened before, was a section labeled Defense Subsystem, Override Locked. Her pulse picked up. She clicked into it. A black screen. Red text. Security Protocol. Blackthorn authorization required. Colonel R. Nash or Dr. E. Monroe function. Preemptive disruption and grid neutralization. Package grid neutralization. Ellie frowned. She scrolled further. Under the system tree were buried commands. Signal disruption. Comms blackouts. EMP pulses. Even drone deployment instructions, though none appeared active. The reactor hadn't just powered lights or scrubbed air. It could shut down infrastructure. It could erase digital footprints, blind surveillance networks, knock out entire regions, all remotely, all quietly. Not a shelter. A weapon in a vault. Her stomach turned. The briefcase files mentioned none of this. Even Evelyn's final journal pages skirted around the term Blackthorn, always scribbled out or avoided entirely. As if she couldn't bear to see it on the page. As if even writing the word made it too real. Ellie stood and stared at the reactor through the glass again. The hum was still gentle, still soothing. It didn't look dangerous, but now she understood. It wasn't the reactor itself. It was the code written around it. Failsafes, hidden loops, control mechanisms. Someone, probably Nash, maybe others, had buried additional protocols inside Evelyn's work. Systems she never wanted activated, functions she fought against. And now, after all these years, Ellie had access to them. With a single key stroke, she could trigger a signal across dormant systems still listening in the dark. But why would Nash give her the key? Why now? She returned to the envelope her father had left her. In it, beneath the letter, was a slip of old microfilm, barely labeled. She placed it into the scanner beside the console and watched as decrypted text began to scroll across the screen. Asterisk. In the event of civilian discovery, Fallback protocol. Reactivate. Recover. Redact. They'd built in a cleanup operation. If anyone like Ellie found the bunker and uncovered the weapon, it was to be activated, logged, then buried again, unless she made a different choice. She looked down at her hand, dirt under her nails, calluses on her fingers, grease stains still clinging to her skin. They built this place for control. But Ellie? She was built to fix what's broken. And for the first time, she knew. This wasn't just a farm. It was a battlefield. The folder was thinner than the others. No blueprints, no diagrams, just 4 sheets of paper, yellowed and folded, tucked inside a sealed envelope marked Ease Only, Executive Order, Operation Blackthorn. Ellie sat at the desk in the bunker's command room, her hand hovering over the flap like it might burn. Everything felt still, too still. The overhead lights buzzed faintly, but the usual hum of the reactor seemed muffled now, like it too was holding its breath. She broke the seal. The first page was a direct order, dated September 1972, signed with a name she didn't recognize, and countersigned, Colonel Raymond Nash. If Project Thistle is accessed by any unauthorized civilian, or if Dr. Monroe is deemed non-compliant, activate Protocol Blackthorn. Ensure containment of intellectual property. Ensure silence. The second page detailed procedures, target neutralization, system purge, and if necessary, destruction of the facility via core destabilization. It was surgical, cold, and deeply personal. Evelyn Monroe had known. Ellie's hands trembled. These weren't passive contingency plans. These were kill orders. The third page was blank except for a handwritten note, its ink bleeding at the edges, like it had been written in a hurry. She refused. She locked the codes, hid the keys. This place is too valuable to destroy but too dangerous to leave open. If anyone finds it, they must choose silence or exposure. There is no in-between. And then, on the final page, typed in a different font, one Ellie hadn't seen before. If you are reading this, and you are not Evelyn Monroe, you are now the custodian of Project Thistle. You hold the last copy of the control override. The world will not thank you for the truth, but it may survive because of it. No signature, no threat, just that final line. Ellie leaned back in the chair, the room suddenly colder than before. She looked around at the panels, the monitors, the archive shelves, the reactor still softly glowing behind glass. She could destroy it all. The system menu had the option now: core purge, confirm, Y, divided by N. She could collapse the entire bunker, bury the weapon beneath rubble and silence like they had always intended, like her father might have, had he stayed. But then she thought of Evelyn's voice, calm, unwavering. Decide what it's for. Not destroy it. Not bury it. Decide. Ellie stood and looked at her reflection in the glass. Behind her, lights blinked like stars on a dark map. She wasn't a scientist. She wasn't a soldier. She was a mechanic, a builder, a girl who bought a broken farm and found a piece of the Cold War still beating under the dirt. She whispered into the silence, "I'm not going to hide this. Not anymore. Not again." It started with a soft hum, a tremor so faint Ellie barely noticed it over the usual whir of the ventilation system. She was deep in the archive room, loading Evelyn's tapes into a salvage player she'd repaired using spare parts from the AV cabinet. The glow of the monitors cast long shadows on the concrete walls, and for a moment, everything felt steady. Then, the lights flickered. Once. Then again. She froze, one hand still resting on the volume dial. The low, rhythmic buzz of the reactor pulsed slower than usual. Off-beat. Sick, she dropped the tape and ran. Down the corridor. The hum grew louder, dissonant, like two machines trying to speak over each other. When she reached the reactor room, the control panel glared red. System alert. Core loop unstable coolant flow. Interrupted automated override. Denied emergency containment. Engaged. The reactor was still sealed behind thick glass, but condensation now formed on the inside. Trailing down like sweat, Ellie darted to the keyboard, hands flying across keys. Nothing responded. The interface froze every few seconds, jumping to new error screens she hadn't seen before. Then the countdown started. Auto-stabilization failure. Containment breach in. 45 to 0 min. Her stomach dropped. She hit the manual override command, denied. She tried the restart sequence, denied. She remembered what Evelyn had said in the hidden recording. If the secondary systems activate, it means someone else is trying to shut it down. Ellie looked up at the overhead security feed. The bunker was sealed. No one else was inside. Unless... She ran to the auxiliary server hub, a rusted cabinet lined with switches and blinking LEDs, and yanked open the panel. There, behind a false wall of wiring, sat a small black box. Active. Warm to the touch. An external signal receiver. Someone was trying to shut it down. From the outside. She ripped it from the panel, wires sparking as she threw it across the room. Immediately, the hum changed pitch. The red lights turned amber. Signal lost. Returning to standby. Coolant flow. Resuming. Reactor stabilizing. The countdown paused. Then reversed. 45 to 0. 44 to 59. 44 to 58. Gone. Ellie collapsed into the chair, breath coming in shallow gasps. She stared at the monitor as green returned to the control interface. The reactor purred again, steady, low, alive. Someone had tried to remote trigger the shutdown. Or worse, the purge. And that meant they knew. Not just about the bunker. About her. She stood slowly, dust on her jeans, oil on her hands, and a steel fire kindling in her chest. The game had changed. No more hiding. If they wanted to erase this place, they'd have to go through its last line of defense. And Ellie Monroe knew how to hold a wrench and hold her ground. The air in the reactor room had returned to stillness, but Ellie hadn't. Her heartbeat was thunder in her ears, every sense tuned to alert. She had stabilized the reactor for now, but someone had sent that signal. Someone still watching. She turned back to the console and opened the communications archive. Most entries were old, dormant transmissions logged decades ago. Weather updates, encrypted government messages, and faded internal memos. Then she found something she hadn't seen before. A folder labeled, Welcome, Legacy Comms System. Last accessed, the 19th of August, 1970, 2 status. Inactive, pending signal. She clicked it. The screen flashed, and static filled the room. Then just as suddenly it cleared, and her grandmother's voice spoke. Ellie, if you've made it this far, then you've found the wall. The room fell silent around her. The voice didn't come from the speakers but from the walls themselves. A hidden comm system, embedded into the concrete, echoing like ghosts. This system was meant for emergencies. Not for control, but for connection. A way to speak without being traced. If you're hearing this, it means you've awakened the core and bypassed the external lockout. Good. That means you're not afraid of the truth. Ellie stepped closer to the wall, placing her hand against the cold cement. They'll come eventually. Not with weapons at first. They'll come with papers. With offers. With silence. They'll tell you it's for your safety. For the good of the nation. They told me the same. I believed them. Until I didn't. Another pause, then softer. I built this place to outlive me. Not just the systems but the story. A farm girl with oil on her hands, trying to hold the world together with duct tape and faith. If that sounds like you, then you're exactly who I hoped would find this. Ellie's throat tightened. Inside the wall, beneath panel 4, there's a drive. I couldn't broadcast the truth, but you can. The data's clean. Unredacted. Names, files, full specs. What they turned Project Thistle into. What they wanted it to be. Ellie ran to panel 4 just beside the main console. She unscrewed the bolts, pried it open, and reached inside. A flash drive, wrapped in oilcloth. Still warm. You don't owe anyone silence, Ellie. Not the people who buried us, not the ghosts who built this. You owe truth, whatever form it takes. And if you're scared, good. That means you're still human. The wall fell quiet. Just a hum now. Just her breath. She turned the drive over in her hands, its surface scratched. Initials faintly carved into the metal. E. M. Not Evelyn. Ellie Monroe. Somehow, someone her grandmother had known she'd come. And now, the next step was clear. Not survival. Revelation. Ellie stepped out of the bunker just before dawn, the heavy hatch closing behind her with a soft clang that echoed like the end of a heartbeat. The cold morning air hit her face, sharp and clean, carrying the scent of damp soil and dew-soaked grass. For a moment, the farm looked as it always had, weathered, crooked, asleep in its own quiet, but now, it held something different. Purpose. She walked past the barn, past the leaning fence she hadn't gotten around to fixing, and stood at the edge of the field as the horizon split with light. Pale gold bled into the sky, painting the silo in warm blush, glinting off the roof of the farmhouse like a quiet benediction. The drive from the bunker was still wrapped in cloth in her back pocket. She hadn't plugged it in. Yet. She didn't need to. Not yet. Her grandmother had asked her to decide. Not to act in rage, not in fear, but in truth. And truth, Ellie realized, wasn't just about exposing secrets. It was about choosing what to do with them. She wasn't just holding evidence of a buried weapon. She was holding the remains of a woman's life work, one built on hope, corrupted by hands she never meant to trust, and now, handed down to her. She turned slowly, taking in the view of the land. The farmhouse had power. The barn was beginning to breathe again. And below it all, 30 feet under her boots, was a reactor still pulsing with potential, still waiting. Ellie reached into her coat and pulled out her keyring. On it were 2 keys now, the original hatch key from Evelyn, and the one from Raymond Nash. She held them in her palm, side by side, 2 pieces of a story that once opposed each other. Then she clipped them together on the same ring, not as a symbol of surrender but of control. Her control. Later that day, she drove into town in her old pickup, laptop in the passenger seat, flash drive inside. She passed rusted mailboxes, sleepy gas stations, people who still waved at strangers. No one knew what lay beneath her boots. Not yet. But maybe one day they would. She stopped at the library. The only place in town with an Ethernet line she could trust. She didn't plug the drive in. Not yet. Instead, she walked the rows of books, tracing spines with fingers still calloused from wrenches and reactor switches. She found the local history section, pulled out the Glenn County Register from 1971, opened it, and saw her grandmother's name listed under a missing persons headline 2 inches wide, 3 lines long. Forgotten. Not anymore. Ellie returned to her truck. The sun was higher now, the metal of the hood warming beneath her hand. Tomorrow, she'd decide what the world needed to know. Today, she had one final thing to do. Restore her name. The farmhouse looked different now. It wasn't just the working lights or the new coat of paint on the front door. It was the feeling. The presence of something that mattered. Ellie walked through the main room slowly, fingers brushing the grain of the old wooden banister. Every creak of the floorboards beneath her feet no longer a flaw, but a rhythm, a beat. Like the house was breathing again. She'd spent the last few weeks restoring it piece by piece, not for resale, not for comfort, but for meaning. The furniture was mismatched. The walls still carried stains from long-forgotten water damage. But the power was steady, warm, silent, reactor-fed. She had installed new panels in the barn, rewired the shed as a tool shop, and even set up a signal blocker to keep outside interference from reaching the bunker. What lay below was hers now, and it was protected. But the world was already shifting. A reporter had called her twice. Not local. Out of state. Said she'd heard something about off-grid energy testing, tied to old land deeds. Ellie hadn't answered. Not yet. She didn't want headlines. She wanted truth to land in the right hands carefully, intentionally, just like her grandmother had wanted. Instead of releasing the data blindly, she'd uploaded the cleanest files from the flash drive to a secured, anonymous archive, and mailed a copy no return address to a non-profit whistleblower network. Not the flashy one. A quiet one. One known for protecting stories that mattered. In the meantime, she opened the farm. To veterans. To local girls who wanted to learn how to turn a wrench. To families who'd lost power one too many times in the storms. She called the initiative Monroe Ground, after the woman who built the reactor and the ground it now powered. She installed benches made from salvaged barnwood, a workshop in the old chicken coop, and an educational space in the front room of the house where she laid out Evelyn's blueprints behind glass no longer hidden, but honored. People came. Not in droves, but in ripples. A teenager with a broken moped. A mother and daughter looking to install solar panels. A retired engineer who said the reactor's hum reminded him of a ship engine he'd worked on in the Navy. And in the evenings, when the work was done and the sun dipped low behind the fields, Ellie would walk to the hatch behind the barn, place her hand on the rusted handle, and whisper, "Still with me?" The hum always answered. Her name, Monroe, no longer felt like an inheritance of silence, but a banner, a legacy, a promise kept. She stood under the stars one night, eyes skyward, hand wrapped around a chipped coffee mug, and smiled. Because some stories don't end in explosions or headlines. Some end in hands, stained with oil, with hearts rebuilt bolt by bolt, and with a bunker beneath a farm that no one believed was worth saving. Until someone did. The end.